offline and online guests and the distinguished guests we have today. We have our head of the operations section from European delegation in Armenia, Mr. Gonzalo Serrano de la Rosa. His Excellency Bedřich Kopecký, Ambassador of the Czech Republic in Republic of Armenia. We are joined by Christian Henschel, the EU for Sevan project team leader, supported by German Development Cooperation. And last but not least, Mr. Pascal Bokers, team leader of the EU Green Agriculture Initiative in Armenia, Gaia project, supported by Austrian Development Agency. And I hope we will have a lively discussion. We do expect questions both from the audience here, but also those following us online can ask their questions and they will be posted later. And now for welcome remarks, I'd like to give the word to Mr. Serrano.
Thanks a lot. Good morning to everyone. Particular thanks to all the partners, colleagues, and friends that are joining us also not only physically here today, but also offline. I'm very glad to also welcome Ambassador Kopecký from the Czech Republic. Today we will be, as Guinée mentioned, we will be getting very much focus on the green agenda in Armenia. Precisely these days also we are celebrating 1 year of the setting up of what we call the Team Europe approach, by which closer than ever before we are working together as EU with our member states. And also in that sense we have Pascalis from the Austria Development Agency and also Christian working for the German technical cooperation, with whom we are also implementing very relevant projects that we will be discussing today. I think we are all aware how difficult, how painful last year it was for Armenia, both from the COVID-19 perspective, but also because of the sad war. But I think the idea with these sort of conversations and cooperation that we are developing is to try to get to focus now into the actual recovery post-dual crisis. We need to move forward and to work together indeed for a prosperous Armenia. This week, and it's not Europe Days, it's in plural, Europe Days, we have been celebrating since like week quite a number of events, still some more to go later in the week. We all celebrate around the May 9 day in the European Union, what we call the celebration around the Schuman Declaration, which was about celebrating peace and reconciliation after the Second World War, and that gave birth later to the European Union. This year also it has been special for at the beginning for the relations between the European Union and Armenia, because the full entry into application of CEPA, the Comprehensive and Enhanced Partnership Agreement, which is defined as a blueprint for reforms in Armenia, which is the strategic framework for the cooperation between the EU and Armenia in many sectors, and notably, as we will discuss later, on the green environmental climate agenda. So in that sense, very happy from our side to be having this discussion today, and then later we will have the opportunity to discuss more in details about this ambitious agenda that the EU has in terms of climate neutrality. So over to you, Pascal. Thanks a lot.
So to open the technical part of the discussion, I'd like to start with a few introductory remarks about the environmental situation in Armenia in general. What is notable is that Armenia inherited a complicated past from the Soviet heritage that left Armenian ecosystems with heavy pollution in heavy metals, contamination of the water resources, pesticides in the soil, Lake Sevan was a dramatic environmental disaster after the construction of the hydropower cascades, but also heavy use for agricultural purposes. And with this heritage, we entered into independent Armenia 30 years ago, where also similar activities continued. The energy crisis led to continued deforestation. Industrial contamination that was left over continued with the mining and metallurgy, releasing a lot of heavy metals. There is pretty concerning and disconcerting, actually, pollution of the soils with unregulated use of pesticides, chemical fertilizers, and these lead to existing, on the top of background environmental pollution that came from 30 years ago, heavy use of transportation, construction, there's air pollution, there's heavy levels of dust, heavy metals in soil. For example, in Sunik Mars register hundreds times higher levels than allowed by sanitary standards. That ends up in our food, appears in our markets, in the agricultural produce. Whereas on the other side, if we look at our main, environmental pearl, Lake Sevan, drop of the level of the water has been, mildly stabilized, although we continue to observe serious environmental concerns with the eutrophication, again, use of pesticides and fertilizers in areas surrounding Lake Sevan, create a lot of surface water runoff, potential contamination issues. On top of that, we're also concerned that still the wastewater, untreated wastewater issue around Lake Sevan continues to be issued just like 60 years ago. So these and many other issues create significant environmental threats, not only to the ecosystems, but we do believe these may be the triggers creating health concerns. Armenian population overall is one of the highest ranking in the occurrence of cancer. Every fifth person is exposed to cancer, which can be triggered by environmental reasons. And we're overall, this also, with the deforestations, et cetera, a lot of the potential risks that are facing us with the 21st century, with the climate change, increased need for resilience and ecosystem preservation. These issues need to be tackled urgently. Europe has been Armenia's strongest partner in this field. There have been a large variety of environmental programs, from sustainable energy to directly environmental projects such as those represented today here. These are the flagship initiatives which create the best practice, and we're hoping these would spill over to other implementing partners. But one of the things that you mentioned, Gonzalo, where the SEPA and Comprehensive and Enhanced Partnership Agreement came into force on the 1st of March this year, which is, congratulations to all of us. With that good news, but it also means a lot of work for us, because that means transposition of a large number of directives, including those in the environmental domain. And even more interesting is the European Green Deal, which is a very ambitious document, and that will also require transposition of certain standards so that we can head to climate neutral 2050. Could you elaborate what EU delegation in Armenia, but also Europe, is doing in this direction in Armenia, and what are the future steps? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Askine, for the introduction about the context in Armenia on the environmental and climate agenda in terms of challenges, but also opportunities for the future that we can take into consideration to work together with government, civil society, private sector to push for this green agenda in Armenia. I'll try to be brief because only these two topics of the European Green Deal and SEPA, they are vast, and we could be here for hours only talking about this. But about the European Green Deal, I think probably the first highlight I would like to do is that we are talking here about European Green Deal. We are not talking about EU Green Deal. Why? Because I think the idea is also from the EU as initiators of this Green Deal is that we cannot do it alone, and that we have to partner together with other countries that are not yet members of the EU or are not members at present or the future. And we have to work together with countries in the Western Balkans or in the Eastern Partnership like Armenia. So we invite to work together and develop this ambitious vision that the Green Deal outlines. Basically, the Green Deal was a sort of very high political initiative that came from Brussels when the new European Commission took place, following the perception that the youth of Europe, of the European Union, was requesting for the EU to do more on the green and the climate agenda and to lead globally. And that's a bit the spirit behind the Green Deal. So for the EU to take action and quick. So of course, this means also important investments that we need to do within the European Union and within Europe in terms of innovation and research, in terms of redesigning our economy and updating also industrial policies in terms of production and also consumption. The EU hopes also under this Green Deal to be climate neutral by 2050, which shows the high level of ambition of the EU, and is inviting other key players and countries in the world to follow. Only recently, even we upgraded our ambitions in terms of the Paris Agreement, in terms of the SDG goals. Initially, I remember we had this idea of 40% decrease in CO2 emissions by 2030, and recently we increased our ambition, and we are now committed to this 55% decrease in CO2 emissions in the European Union. The assessment as of now is that we are on track, that we are fulfilling at country level also our goals, but that definitely we can do more, and the big target is indeed towards 2050 to achieve this climate neutrality. And for that, there will be efforts in terms of legislation at the European level, what we call the EU climate law, also to be adopted, and also what we call the climate pact, in a sense that it cannot be, let's say, only coming from the institutions, but that it will require also the engagement of the citizens, the civil society, the private sector, and all authorities at all levels. So there is, and without entering into details of what this Green Deal means, but there is an ambitious action plan in terms of transport, energy, biodiversity, in which, by the way, here at country level, we are going to work very closely all together with colleagues from the Czech Republic on the circular economy and also on agriculture, just to give a bit of a sense about the Green Deal. Now, of course, the Green Deal came in as a concept prior to the crisis, the COVID-19. And now we are, let's say, evolving in the understanding and in the concept of this Green Deal, and we are now even more than ever talking about green recovery. And this is a dialogue, a discussion that we are having also here in Armenia with our interlocutors in government, with local authorities, with the civil society. Green recovery, in the sense that to now help with the recovery of the country, of course, we need to focus on the economic angle. That seems to be the top priority here in Armenia, but we can do that. We can get into this economic recovery as a top priority, but to make sure that this recovery is also green and social and inclusive, what we call. That green is not, let's say, an expenditure. It's more of an investment, an opportunity, and that we can, let's say, identify new opportunities in terms of growth and jobs for the people in Armenia, and notably in the regions. Green means also enhance competitiveness, in a globalized and regional vision. A final reference indeed for SEPA, as I mentioned before. SEPA is notably green, I would say, because as you mentioned, as Guinea, it's a very ambitious agenda that also we have developed together in Armenia with the government. There is a roadmap with over 200 actions that the government has put together in terms of approximation to EU standards on environment, on energy and transport. And as I say, more than half of these 200 actions of the existing roadmap are related to this green green agenda. So in that sense, we welcome and we value the commitment and again the ambition of the authorities, of the society here in Armenia to push for this green agenda. Maybe later I will do a bit more of a detailed reference, not to take that long in this first question, about how practically we are helping Armenia with this approximation, with this modernization of systems, with these new mindsets, because it requires collective efforts from all citizens at all levels to push for a greener, let's say, future Armenia. Over to you, Haskine. Thanks.
Thank you, Gonzalo. That's intriguing indeed. We would like to hear more later about what particular steps will be taken to, prepare for the implementation of SEPA and hopefully the European Green Deal. I would like to pass the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Bedřich Opetsky, because we know the Czech Republic, through the embassy, is dedicated to supporting the environmental initiatives in Armenia. And we would like to know more about what particular initiatives you're taking, any programs, or what form of support, and how you've selected these areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody. Thank you. I really am very glad to have the possibility to take part in this event, and I can only say that I'm very happy that we can, so to say, celebrate European Days with very concrete events and environment and to manage climate risk. One is sure one of the absolutely most important things. Perhaps before I speak about our cooperation, I should say two things. We in the Czech Republic also have a terrible heritage of the old socialist, so-called socialist system, and more happily we are very glad that we are part of the European Union and European Green Deal. It's really extremely important, and as a beginning I would like to say that in the governmental papers it's stressed that in the context of the acute climate risk it's highly important to connect the humanitarian development and stabilization help, so say also the cooperation with third countries. And when we speak about this aims 55% climate neutrality to 2030 and climate neutrality 2050, perhaps I can mention that the German Constitutional Court found it not sufficient and obliged the German government to be more ambitious. So, and in fact, it was in fact said from the German Constitutional Court, and we should be really very aware of it, that it's necessary for the future of young generation. And this, I think, we should be all aware of it. And you see, we, in fact, within this framework of development, humanitarian stabilization, we should see specific importance to reduce the dangerous climate changes and to achieve more resilience. In fact, to be the integral part of efforts of the European Union to reduce the risk of catastrophes in connection within the change of climate, it's one of the most important priorities of the Czech Republic. And I see personally as a very positive sign that also in the Republic of Armenia, the public is more and more aware of the importance of climate changes problems. It's really, the awareness, it's very, very important. And I would like to mention one thing what we as the embassy can observe, and it's the management of waste. It's, I think, one of the most really important challenges for Armenia. As I know, or approximately in Armenia every year, we can appears approximately 650,000 tons municipal solid waste. And this solid waste is practically not recycled, not divided, classified. And I think that the public and the government of the Republic of Armenia is aware of these problems. And I mention it because the Czech companies really can offer very modern technologies to resolve these very acute problems in all dimensions. And concrete also, I would like to stress one more project that we actively support is protection. We see that protection of biodiversity, the richness, flora, fauna, ecosystems, has been a cornerstone of European Union policy. And it's now clearly understood that prosperity and well-being of people is impossible without functioning ecosystem. Production of crops in high or even organic quality without overuse of pesticides, it was already mentioned, may serve as an example of an activity leading to prosperity in combination with a healthy and well-balanced natural environment. Natural diversity, currently facing many threats, including in Armenia, is considered a common and obvious value, just like cultural heritage. Therefore, we feel obliged to actively protect it and pass it in the best possible state to the next generations. The Czech Republic, perhaps I can mention this, joined the European Union in 2004 and has been putting the EU nature directives in practice ever since. And it's our pleasure to share the lessons that have been learned over the past 17 years, and it's our honor to support the application of the best practices and methods that will be identified. And I think that we are very proud that Czech experts, together with their Finnish and Armenian colleagues, have just started a 2-year twinning project called Strengthen Protection and Sustainable Use of Biodiversity in Armenia, in line with European standards, that has 3 important goals: approximating the legal framework of biodiversity protection in Armenia with the EU legislation, building capacities both on institutional and professional levels, raising awareness on importance and value of Armenian biodiversity and need for its protection. I think that we should be very proud that the Armenian government seeks inspiration and support in this regard, and we are happy to be of assistance in protecting the immense value of biodiversity in Armenia and the sustainable use of natural resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is extremely interesting, especially because I know Armenia is striving to eventually come up with a legal framework regards to ecosystem services, and we just recently finished our 4th national assessment of biodiversity resources national strategy on biodiversity. These are very critical, and unless we can come up with the economic valuation techniques and prescribe them legally, the green recovery will be complicated, but because a lot of these investments take a toll on biodiversity, and Armenia still remains a biodiversity hotspot. I also appreciate your comments on waste management. EU has been doing incredibly on the support of at least some of the cities with construction of sanitary landfills for municipal solid waste, but also utilization of biogas in the future Yerevan new municipal landfill. These are critical because in many cities we still struggle with that issue, and there's leachate, and a lot of the waste needs to also be managed to minimize the volume. So sorting and recycling are critical. Yerevan has taken a step in this direction, so we're hoping to see more of sorting and recycling with your support, of course. Thank you very much. I want to pass to the topic of Lake Sevan and issues that German Development Cooperation is tackling. Lake Sevan, as I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, has been an environmental concern for us since 1960s, when the Sevan hydropower cascade has been built and the lake level dropped by 19.5 meters. A lot has been done since then to stop at least and stabilize the level with Arpa-Sevan tunnel and the Vorotan tunnel. But we have already such a low level of the water that it becomes a biochemically still not resilient to the quantity of wastewater that is leaking into it, heavy use of agricultural chemicals in the surrounding areas, and more recently caged aquaculture in Lake Sevan added another stress to the level. So I would like to ask Mr. Henschel to comment about on the EU for Sevan project and how German Development Cooperation is tackling this issue in the EU for Sevan project. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much to give the opportunity to talk about the lake. This is really, I think, in the heart of everyone in Armenia and even beyond. It's a jewel of Armenia, and we all see that. It's taking up a big space of Armenia, and so very important. So the EU for Sevan project, you have mentioned a few problems. I think the main problems of Lake Sevan, which regards pollution. I think the lake level was one of the issues in the past that is quite stabilized, and there is a law that supports the raising of the level. There are also environmental laws in place that are guiding the government and the citizen to deal environmentally responsible, but the implementation is an issue. And the second issue is the full understanding of the impacts of the environmental situation. Yeah, so the EU for Sevan is not alone in dealing with the lake, and EU for Sevan as a project is one of the cornerstones maybe now in dealing with the lake with EU support. But for example, we are building on the draft river basin management plan that has been established in another project, the EU Water Initiative Plus. That gives us quite a good understanding of the environmental problems. But if you open that document that is currently awaiting approval, you will see there are a lot of data gaps. You will not exactly know where is the waste coming from, what does the wastewater look like, where exactly are the hotspots. And also in terms of the livestock sector, that's a big contribution to environmental pollution. So there are a lot of data gaps at the moment still that the relevant institutions here are dealing with. The mandates are there, and so EU for Sevan is now assisting some of the government institutions. Specifically, we're dealing with supporting the Ministry of Environment to enhance the monitoring system, to get a proper understanding, to then impact decision making based on proper data and information. Yeah, but we know that mainly agricultural land use of pesticides, fertilizers, and also the wastewater production by humans and also by livestock are one of the main contributors to the pollution of the lake. So these are the two cornerstones technically of the EU for Sevan project, to first of all work with farmers, with decision makers, with the communities to identify innovative best practice solutions to reduce pollution from agriculture. But also to give them opportunities to have more income, different kinds of income, really support the livelihood approach. Because only if we combine these two issues will we reduce the pressure of the natural resources in order to enable the overall watershed to flourish. Yeah, only a flourishing community can actually be sustainable. The second part is wastewater management. Yeah? So in the former Soviet Union, systems were established, they were somehow working. I can't say how well it was managed. What we see now, based again on current studies, and actually if you just observe yourself as a person around the lake, is you see wastewater purely flowing into the lake. And so the EU for Sevan project is assisting the Ministry of Environment basically to identify best practices, workable practices that work in the specific condition of the lake. It's not easy because climatically it's quite challenging. We're focusing on nature-based systems because we are an environmental program, but then you need also the environmental conditions to actually have these systems working. So we're carrying out a feasibility study to identify what specific technical solutions can help to manage to treat the wastewater. first in a pilot study, but the idea is then to, really to find a solution that can be replicated around the lake and even beyond, because the wastewater sector in Armenia in general needs also proper attention. And so this feasibility study looks at not just the technical situation, how does actually the treatment plant need to look like, but how is it managed? Who's paying for it? Where are the capacities for that? Which institution actually takes responsibility for that? And so on. So there are a lot of technical questions actually on sector level that need to be responded. The lake is not on an island, or it's not an island in the Armenian context. So we need to look a little bit beyond on the national level as well. And then the last part is obviously the communities around the lake, all the stakeholders, the tourists, everyone in Armenia has a relationship with the lake. And everyone's responsibility is to take over that responsibility and engage in environmentally sustainable behavior. So we're also looking to build this vision. I think there is a vision, but it also needs to be properly implemented so that everyone can be part of this roadmap to improve the lake situation. And the last part is then again the governance system. So we're also working with UNDP as part of implementing this project, the United Nations Development Program, who looks at improving the overall ecosystem governance, looking at the institutional framework, how the lake is managed, and how this can be improved through an improved legal and policy framework. Yeah. So I already indicated the need of national interventions, and so this is also taken care of. Yeah.
Thank you. Indeed, as you mentioned, every Armenian relates to the lake. It's a matter of cultural, emotional relationship, and very often our consultants comment that when you see that the art, the poetry, the music has so many denominations of Lake Sevan, you do realize the true ecosystem value of this resource. I would be curious to hear more about the technical solutions, because I know in the past the wastewater collection system has been discussed. 20 years back it was discussed to have a circular collector. Would the project be coming up with particular, and not only the solution but also implementing it?
Yeah. So the circular, you mean the Soviet...
The Soviet flat surface.
Yeah, so this is, we're looking at the past, and these are not sustainable solutions because they are very capital and infrastructure intensive. So this is obviously not a very adjusted approach, and also not nature-based, because you will have to build a lot of infrastructure and maintain that, and that requires a lot of energy. So that's not very sustainable, given the socioeconomic background, but also given the technical background here in the lake. So what we're looking at is more at the decentralized. So there are some treatment plants actually in covering some of the cities around Lake Sevan. They're not functioning properly. They're mainly treating mechanically, so they're only taking bigger chunks of waste out, or wastewater out, and then discharging untreated wastewater into the lake. So that's not a contribution to a healthy lake. So there are also initiatives, for example, supported through the EU to upgrade these systems. So we are focusing more on rural communities or peri-urban communities where you can't really invest big amounts of money. So that's where the decentralized systems come in place. Decentralized means, or off-grid means, you don't need to build a sewerage network. So you're limited with actually just the treatment plant and small-scale sewerage systems. Secondly, it's also usually quite simple technically to operate them, and the cost is also less than a big system where a lot of energy needs to go in. So that's what we're looking at. We don't exactly know what technical solution is feasible, because there are not so many examples even around the lake, around the world, that can be compared with. And then again, it's a very specific local situation. So we just really want to focus on identifying what can work in the future and what can be taken up then by the communities around the lake to manage all the wastewater that is produced there.
Thank you very much. Good luck with that, and looking forward to the solutions. That's the drinking freshwater bank of Armenia's future generations. So. Part of part of EU supporting this sector. I mean, we've had EU supported construction of wastewater treatment stations in Jermuk and Dilijan. So there's a lot of, and a lot of communities still lack these treatment stations. So a lot of this experiences hopefully will be replicable for smaller communities. Now, agricultural use of chemicals and livestock has been an issue for Sevan, but the broader agricultural sector in Armenia is a serious issue. And while a lot of our farmers praise themselves for keeping the heritage, and we have millennia of farming traditions, that used to be a good thing. But I think in the challenges of the 21st century and the climate change, a lot has to change. We can't keep growing the same things the same manner we did 100 years ago, and our farmers are stuck to that. A lot has to change towards smarter, more resilient agriculture, and I know EU Gaia project, Green Agriculture Initiative for Armenia, is looking at that. So, Mr. Bokers, would you comment on and introduce, what are the initiatives and what are the activities you're implementing?
Yeah, thank you very much. The EU Gaia project, the Green Agriculture Initiative in Armenia project, is implemented by ADA, the Austrian Development Agency, jointly with UNDP. The green agriculture, I think, has a very large support in the sense that a lot of people here in Armenia pride themselves of having healthy food, juicy food, tasty food, the importance people attach to having a good meal and having it without pesticides, without any contamination. I think that is very much supported. So, like Mr. Serrano already said, there is quite a potential for green produce. Of course, in agriculture, general agriculture has problems, not only unique to Armenia, but all over the world. Productivity of agriculture is rather low. If we look at the labor force involved in agriculture being 40%, while the contribution to GDP is about 20%, we can see that the productivity is low, but also some of the productivity does not show up in the GDP because a lot of people use their agriculture as a main survival strategy. We can also see that due to COVID, more people are active in agriculture because options were not there, like options for migration, options for off-farm employment. So agriculture is still a very traditional, for many agribusiness, a very traditional undertaking, and it is done in the same way as done by their parents, by their previous generations, because the innovations or the knowledge is not there, or the possibilities for investment is not there. We have to realize that a hectare of potatoes or 1,000 square meters of potatoes has a lower yield of high value crops like grown under greenhouses or with improved techniques of production, and there are possibilities of improving that, but it needs innovation, it needs taking risk, it needs investment, and a lot of times the agribusiness are on the small side for taking that kind of risk. And the first objective of agribusiness is survival, self-sufficiency, creating food for their own family. That is one of the constraints, the small size of a lot of land holdings. I come from the Netherlands, I come from a farming family, and that farm was too small for being economically viable. It was, at one moment, it had to be decided, farming has to stop, we have to generate other employment, we have to go somewhere else. And I think in Armenia we also have a lot of cases where farming is for self-sufficiency but not really linked to the market. So that is the second aspect. The market is very volatile and it's changing, and there are a lot of possibilities in the market, but it is very difficult for agribusinesses to link up with the market. If I see now in Armenia, there are quite some changes in produce, what is available, and there are some high value crops, but in the rural areas there are very few farmers who switch to those high value crops, because again the strategy is not for producing for the market, but producing first for themselves, and what is left over can be sold to the market. But there are new produce like Brussels sprouts, like kale, like mushrooms, oyster mushrooms. When I came into Armenia 17 years ago, you could not find all those kind of things. Now you find them. Much to my pleasure, but I think there are a lot of possibilities there. So, but there we have to not only look at the farmer, we also have to look at the whole sector. And then not, because when we talk about agriculture, a lot of times we only see the farmer plowing or the farmer harvesting, but it is for the whole sector, also the processors and also the consumers, the retail sector, the consumers, is the whole food system that has to be aware of what is the added value of sustainable produced crops. So when I said first innovation, second the market linkage, and third, I think it is the, what you already mentioned, what was already mentioned here is the implementation of effective policies, of prohibiting harmful pesticides, of prohibiting harmful practices, soil depletion, and so on. What EU Gaia is working on is supporting farmers on getting new innovations at farm level. For instance, drip irrigation, using water in an efficient way, minimum tillage of not disturbing the soil but letting the soil regenerate itself, integrated pest management, so not a blanket spraying of the whole crop, but only if there is a need on pockets of infestations. Then apart from that, so at the farm level, support at the farm level, there are also demonstration farms where these new technologies can be shown, what can be, that it is relevant for the farmers in the area, that it is beneficial at farm level. That is also a work to promote the innovations, and also we work together with the Armenian National Agrarian University are now to support precision agriculture and to support the curriculum with greener topics, and so that there is a knowledge not only at farm level but also at for the new students who in future will be supporting the farms. For the market linkage, EU Gaia is supporting post-harvest facilities so that there is more possibility for processing the produce of the farmers. When I was previously working for instance for a dairy project, there was really a great benefit to be seen that farmers could bring their milk to a collection center and get cash. Because before farmers had milk, could only process it into cheese, but there was no market because locally everybody had cheese, everybody had the same strategy for preserving milk, making it into cheese. Women were working up to 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, but there was no market for it. And in Yerevan, people want to have certified cheese with a label on it and of constant quality. And sometimes the quality of the village is much higher, sometimes it is a bit lower, it could not be guaranteed. And at the moment that milk collection centers were buying milk, even a person with 1 cow could sell milk and get 400 or 500 gram in a day, and you could really see that there was a bigger output and a bigger number of people engaged in farming, in dairy. So if there is a possibility to link the rural population to the market, I think through post-harvest facilities that are supported, and also training of agribusinesses in proper marketing tools, in rational marketing, in what is a rational investment, what is not a rational investment. That kind of support is also provided. And for the support or for the government policies, EU Gaia is also supporting the government with improved legislation supporting that, but also, for instance, we have a support for the seed and planting material institution for improved seed and planting material, because seed and planting materials, if that is healthy, then you can have healthy crops. So also on that level we support. So that is where EU Gaia is intervening.
I do have a follow-up question. Thank you very much. You mentioned on the example of cheese, certified and quality, and earlier Mr. Serrano commented on the need for green recovery. So these investments in agriculture in Armenia are these, classical steps towards green recovery, creation of jobs, fairness, equity, resilience of local economies. But an additional concern we have right now, and Armenia spent over 20 years subsidizing agricultural sector so it would be strong and resilient. And one of the hopes we had for agriculture sector was exports, and not only the local but also international markets as a potential source of foreign currency to service our spiking foreign debt. Do you think there's prospects for certified products from agricultural produce to also have export perspectives?
I really think it does, because we have to look at what are the conditions of Armenia. We are having only very few export opportunities across the border. If we look in Europe, for instance, my country, Netherlands, more than 50% is directly exported to neighboring countries. Here there is a problem for that, especially for instance in the Netherlands with good infrastructure. There is a possibility of exporting fresh fruit to Germany, flowers to all those kind of things are possible to export over there, because there is a good infrastructure. Here the infrastructure, it's a little bit different, and especially the markets that can be found are in many cases not directly our neighboring countries. So where our markets can be found is, for instance, Russia, or in Europe, Middle East, whatever, but the possibilities to export are in niche markets, not in bulk. Armenia cannot export bulk potatoes or bulk wheat because it doesn't have the land resources. Other countries are much better in the region. Ukraine has much more wheat, Russia has much more wheat, and Armenia can never go into that area. So a niche market, and especially certified product, is a niche market which is very much appreciated, especially now in Europe. The certified produce is very much appealing to the younger generations, not only, but to a lot of people who realize that there has to be a change in production. It is not a matter of how we are, or if we need to change, but how we have to change. And for and certified products are really giving the added value, and it is appreciated in many places.
This may be the broader, actually going back to the broader topic of standards and certification, especially with SEPA and European Green Deal. Maybe you can comment on this, Mr. Serrano. What will be done in the coming years to transpose those standards, and whether Europe will be is planning any efforts to support Armenia in this transposing the standards? One of the concerns would be, with such ambitious standards within EU, in exporting nations would be competing in the internal European markets within the local standard framework. And what should Armenia do to be competitive in the European markets, and also to transpose and harmonize the standards framework?
No, thanks a lot also for the good question. I'm happy to answer this question after the experience here by Pascalis and Christian, because definitely these tangible projects on the ground do help also to work in terms of policies and legal approximation and so on in different sectors. Let's say that in terms of helping Armenia with the SEPA, with implementation of the roadmap that I mentioned before, that is very much agreeing with very ambitious agenda on the environment, on agriculture, rural development, transport, energy, and so on. We work, let's say, at two levels. First, let's say at more strategic and policy level, by which we have instruments like TIEX or twinning, that allow, let's say, the exchange of expertise and lessons learned between the European Union and member states and Armenia. And I think this is a very interesting exercise, very, let's say, humble and honest, because I think like this, like for instance from the Netherlands or Germany, Spain, or the Czech Republic, we are able to share lessons learned, in a specific topic, let's say waste management. And in a honest way, we share what we learned and what we did right and what we did wrong, so that we share our models. And we don't try to impose any solution. I think Armenia has to look around and adapt to the reality and adopt the best model for any specific topic, like for instance on waste. So regularly we have these sort of seminars. Before also the COVID, we had the field visits or missions of officials, local authorities, private sector representatives from Armenia going to different countries in the EU and to see with your own eyes and to exchange with similar interlocutors, so that you get the idea of how we did it in a specific country in the EU member states. So that helps to build capacities, to build systems, and to make stronger institutions. Let's say the Ministry of Environment or the Ministry of Economy, Agriculture, in terms of delivering more and better for the farmers, for the agribusiness, and so on. So that's a bit of a modality we have. These TIEX, regular missions, exchange, and so on. We also have twinning, as we mentioned before, with Czech Republic, with Finland, by which we place experts in the ministry. Like now, at present, in the Ministry of Environment, we have experts on biodiversity, that allow for a more permanent, let's say, a stable exchange and advice to the authorities and relevant stakeholders in Armenia. So with that, we help Armenia deliver on this roadmap. As you mentioned, there are many directives or EU Council conclusions that somehow the Armenia and partner countries in the region want to adopt, and many of these require time. So that's why we have this roadmap of the government with a reasonable time frame, because many of these legislations or regulations will take years for Armenia. And then it comes the question of implementation. That's another thing. So we are talking about reforms, not for today, not for tomorrow, but for the longer term. And that's where we are trying to help with all these reforms. So that's a bit, as I said, in terms of capacities, systems, institutions, but then we go to the ground, and we do implement together, like the examples that we are having today, projects on the ground, where we bring also, again, expertise from our countries in the EU, and we work closely with the people and with the private sector, with the local authorities, and we try to, let's say, again, learn together and develop some sort of pilot initiatives that can be later replicated in other regions or communities in Armenia. That's also a lesson learned exercise that allowed the government to see how realistic this policy is, or this strategic direction in terms of agriculture, in terms of waste management. So these are a bit in generic terms the instruments that we do have. let's not forget also, as also Christian mentioned, many of these reforms also require massive investments. And for that also we work very closely with the banks, with the private banks in Armenia, and notably also through European banks like the European Investment Bank, EBRD, KfW, AFD, FMO from the Netherlands, to facilitate, let's say, the financing requirements and needs, and notably for the SMEs, for the small and medium companies, for the small and medium agribusinesses, so that they have also the financial resources also to take those risks, to make those investments necessary to survive, and to do more than survive, to prosper, and why not to compete in the region, and why not to be, as also Pascalis mentioned before, to be a bit more ambitious and to focus on quality more than quantity, so that you have access to the EU markets, because the EU markets are very demanding, very competitive. And the feeling that we have is that because of all these limitations that we face here in Armenia, the temptation of the farmer or livestock handler is to survive, to focus on quantity, to reach the easy markets in the region, and not to, let's say, adopt a more risky, let's say, or investment-based approach. So that's a bit of the trend, to just repeat how you did, or your father did, or your grandfather. And sometimes it's better maybe to innovate, to be creative, and to see the results, not the same year or the year after, but after a few years you will see, the benefit of such sort of investment. But they need guidance, they need expertise, and we do hope that with this sort of projects, we are helping Armenia to move into that longer term direction.
Well, I want to come back to Your Excellency. You commented on the experience of Czech Republic with the, Soviet past. And actually, in my work, I've often come across the experience that experts from this ex-Warsaw Pact countries have gone through some of those painful experiences, and they usually have very relating and very comparable lessons learned. And in your experience, especially with a country that entered the EU in 2004 and had the transposition experience of the legislation, and Armenia with SEPA is facing these challenges ahead, and some of the Western Balkan countries have been tackling this in the last 10 years, putting a lot of effort into this. What is your insight what from the Czech Republic experience on a transposition and transformation to harmonize with the EU and get into those niche markets, but also transpose some of the legal best practices that come with SEPA?
Thank you. It's, I think, very important questions because as far as transposition is concerned, of course, it's adoption of legal systems, first of all. But so to say, to adapt legal systems is much more easier than to implementing them in reality, in the praxis. And here I think we have really big experience. Our heritage was a really heavy polluted country because of the heavy industry, traditional heavy industry. It was not the heritage, only the heritage of the so-called socialist systems. In fact, we were industrial country before the First World War. Before the First World War, 2/3 of the industry on the territory of the Austrian-Hungarian monarchy was on the territory of the today's Czech Republic. And of course, it was also heritage to adapt. The implementation is much more important because, of course, this heavy industry is connected with thousands and thousands labor prices. So you should adapt these legal systems without any doubt, but then you must implement them, and I think we succeeded. For example, for our coal power plants, we we bought very quickly the most modern technology from Germany, filter systems, and so we received very quickly good systems, and it's of course connected with money. We had the possibilities to invest because, in fact, the Czechoslovak at that time, Czechoslovak economy was the most efficient economy within this whole not healthy, to be not too aggressive, not healthy systems. But it's, of course, it's very difficult, but I am sure we have something to offer for you because we have really big experience for this adoption of legal system and then implementing them. But as it was said, it's really connected with big investments, without any doubt.
Well, actually, in that dimension, I mean, understanding the current economic challenges of post-crisis, not even post-COVID, I mean, still COVID, economy and lack of investment capital, challenges on the government side dealing with the health and the defense. Maybe this is a broader question to everyone. With the knowledge of best practices internationally, with the knowledge of nature-based solutions, with the knowledge of, the targets set by the European Green Deal and SEPA, a lot of this is not just legal regulatory. And if the government cannot help with investments, what can regular citizens do and small businesses? How can they take action? What behaviors or mindsets need to change so that perhaps this green transformation and green recovery can happen bottom up? Any insights you can share from your respective spheres would be great.
Thank you. Yeah, I can perhaps looking at the wastewater sector as an example. Yeah, I mean, if we look at the German or European context, this didn't happen automatically because the government said this is something we want to deal with now. It's a problem-based solution because people in the 70s and the 80s, for example, in Germany, they were fed up with black rivers, green lakes, and all the environmental consequences of ineffective environmental legislation, or maybe hardly existing environmental legislation. So that's when the Green Movement came up, actually. I mean, it's basically also the birthplace of the Green Party in Germany, which is now very strong. I mean, they just nominated a candidate to become prime minister. So you see that's a long way, 40 years history in that. So one of the issues was the water quality issues at that time and solid waste management and so on. And that was really just people demanding improved environmental management and healthy environments, pushing for that. And that's when the environmental legislation actually in Germany was maybe not born, but improved. And that basically pushed the government then to start doing things because obviously you need a healthy democracy in order to establish such systems. But through the parliaments then, legislation was established. In the wastewater context, effluent standards were established, and that created a mechanism to say, okay, if we want that kind of water to go into our water bodies, we will need to come up with a solution with some investments into treatment technologies. We need to look into how to finance that. We need to look at the technical capacity to do all of that. And then we have a very strong association, Water and Wastewater Association. And that's now part of the regulatory system. It's kind of self-regulatory. Yeah? You don't have the government just responsible for it, but you have a wide range of stakeholders that becomes responsible for doing that. And it's not just the national government that pushes that. Actually, we have a system in Germany that always looks at the lowest part, or at the lowest institutional level. So if you have a community being able to do something, they will do it. If they need support, then you will go to the higher level, and obviously investments need to come for a higher level. But a lot of the technical institutional issues can be discussed on a communal level, on a district level maybe, or even on a regional level. You don't always need the national level involved. And that's what makes systems strong, because if community feels responsible, then they will also start to be able to manage. Yeah, so this is perhaps it starts from everyone. It starts. I mean, everyone is responsible for for their own behavior within the environment, but also to demand others. And I think the last part here is then enforcement. That's again the government part. To make sure that if legislation is established, effluent standards, for example, are established, then go and check them, establish a monitoring system and enforce with fines, with whatever is necessary to make sure that then this is also done. And that means implementation, actually. I mean, otherwise there's no need to implement all these legislative documents that we have in place.
Yeah, but that's also touching upon Armenia's existing environmental monitoring capacities institutionally, technically. Those also need to be strengthened. I've looked at European-supported projects, and those are actually requiring investments as well, so that we can truly establish a state of the environmentalists.
No, I totally agree with Christian. Thanks a lot. Only maybe just to say that we should not underestimate also the role of the private sector that can play, especially in the absence of a massive, let's say, fiscal space from the government. I think here we need to be innovative, creative, and count on private sector. We have regulations also under development in terms of PPPs here in Armenia. We are also from the EU side investing on these, like for instance on the solar energy. You know about Maastricht, where we are setting up together with EBRD and IFC from the World Bank this new solar plant of 50 megawatts. And there is an important engagement with the private sectors also to bring investments, funds, and then they will recover with a decent negotiated period. They will recover the investment and take a proportionate benefit, because that's how business works. So I'm very sure that in other, let's say, environmental green areas, beyond water, which is also the obvious one, there are opportunities, and in this case in Armenia, the need to engage and to count more on private sector, because the space, the fiscal space, is not there yet. And I do agree with Christian also on the need of, let's say, educating citizens and changing mindsets, because this will take time, but again, and it's cheap, better than doing massive investment. It takes time to change the mindsets. I remember, for instance, when I was a kid, the perception of the cleanliness or environment was a bit different all over the place. But with all these education and communication campaigns, we all became aware, and better citizens overall. I remember, for instance, when we were in the school, it was very common to wash your hands and to leave the water running, forever. We don't close it. But then we had the drought, and then we had a lot of campaigns and policies to educate us. Please close the faucet, the tap, after you finish. Don't let it running, or just throw in papers and so on. It was like common. I remember as a kid, I was seeing this every day. But then it took a bit of time, also to change the behaviors and understanding that that's the best investment we can all do. Instead of building, massive infrastructure or providing massive equipment, the better is to avoid the problem, with better behavior, I would say. Over.
When we speak about the private sector, I think it's useful to add that it's extremely important to create attractive investment environment for foreign companies. It's so when you speak about our practice, I remember in the early 90s, I was director in the department German-speaking countries and Scandinavia, and at that time my government tried to receive from Germany alone approximately $1 billion, and the Chancellor rejected this request, and he told to our Prime Minister, please, you will receive so huge investments from German companies, you don't need it. And he was right. but it's really about investment environment. So to attract foreign investments, it's extremely important.
Well, this is actually critical. We're talking about creating market conditions in which the citizens, businesses, private sector would do the right thing. You know, like closing water. When I was a child, a similar experience. Cooling watermelon, the only right thing was leaving it under running water. And then you introduce metering, and that automatically stops being an old tradition. It's just, you know, you stop doing that. But at the same time, have to make it attractive for investors in all sectors, agriculture, SMEs, or wastewater treatment. Maybe we need to introduce some legal provisions that will trigger the right investment of the private sector, or, you know, create the ecosystem services monetized so that people pay rather than dump it into the watershed. What are your thoughts? What can be done to create the healthy market field, the market environment in which doing the right thing would make financial sense in both water and wastewater and agricultural sectors?
Yeah, if I may answer or start answering this question. I think here we have to look at all aspects of sustainability. What is accepted by the people, what is accepted by economy, and what is accepted by environment. And we should not say it is only because environmental reason, because at one moment if it is not economically sustainable, then it will die out because it needs to be subsidized. And a subsidy can work for a year or 10 years, but at one moment it is not financial sustainable. So in that aspect, we have to look at all aspects of sustainability. It should be also accepted by the people. The practices should be, you cannot deny food habits. On the other hand, food habits also change. If I look in my environment, how many vegetarians there are in the Netherlands, it has increased. And maybe before it was with the reason of being pity for the animals, and but the sustainability aspect of better for the environment, more or a lower, smaller eco footprint is also increasing, and people are motivated for that. And I think that there we have to connect all the stakeholders and with all the reasons of sustainability. And I think there we can motivate the people. Awareness raising, it has to be done. Awareness raising is also for us a very big part of our program, awareness raising of consumers and producers. And there are really, that is really what has to be followed up.
Yeah, in regards to the water wastewater sector, I think it's a bit of an automatic response that happens. You can also look into the climate change area now. Again, the same story, Germany. People have demanded to the Constitutional Court to review the targets, and they said it's unconstitutional, and they have increased it. It's the same story as I explained earlier, that you have highlighted earlier as well. So with stronger legislative borders, the private sector will react because the technical solutions need to be developed. In the wastewater sector, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have many countries that are managing their wastewater sectors well. The experience is there, the knowledge is there. The matter is to say, okay, how can it work in the Armenian context? This is what we need to pilot. There are some initiatives, not many, unfortunately. The wastewater sector needs a lot of attention here, but it can develop. The main challenge is the financing framework, actually, and that needs a lot of government support. It is heavy investment, even if we look at nature-based solutions, because you will need a lot of investments into even if it's small scale, it's still a lot of money for Armenia. And so this is not a private sector thing. It is a government responsibility to develop an investment framework and an investment pipeline with international assistance, obviously, but it also needs to attract the private sector. The incentives are clear. We're talking about sustainable environmental issues. We can only live in a sustainable environment. And we're talking about public health, because all that wastewater that goes into the lake, into Lake Sevan, we're consuming even here. The agriculture is consuming it all along the Rassan River. People here consume it as drinking water, maybe. So the impacts are strong and needs to be taken seriously. And if that is really taken up, I think there is a framework to do that.
I think expecting that the people would demand the environmental quality, there's a certain economic learning curve. When people are desperate for jobs and employment, environmental quality and health becomes a second priority. And we've observed that in many transition economies, which is why I believe what Pascal said about the awareness. Don't wait until you're happily employed and have gainful employment before you start demanding environmental quality. Start communicating that to the younger generation as soon as possible, so that demand is there. I think also with what Mr. Serrano mentioned with the fiscal space, it's also important that they know that investments in regular infrastructure projects or regular development projects have financing conditions which are less attractive than the greener investments. I mean, with EU support, with member states and European Commission support, a lot of the private banks have credit lines that are green and do come with substantial grant contribution from European donors that make them more concessional, more attractive. So this can be their way of doing the right thing, because it also comes at more attractive financing conditions. And it's important to spread the word, especially to the SMEs we have in the agricultural sector. And also some of the smaller municipalities, their investments can be also financed through these green vehicles. What do you think, Gonzalo?
No, absolutely, I totally agree. In many of our programs and financing schemes, somehow we already put as a precondition that this program, this project, this initiative, this investment has to be green. It's a sort of requirement, I was saying, to access support or financial or technical expertise. I'm thinking, for instance, lately the FMO, the Dutch Development Bank also issued for the first time here with Armenia Bank, probably, the green bonds, also. So there is a sort of still piloting and innovative, let's say, approach to be taken. But I think it has to happen, because what is needed is indeed to anticipate all these events in terms of environment and climate impact of our actions and to prevent them. So as I said, many of these programs and financing schemes, they do impose conditionalities, let's say, that this SME will be invested, will be supported if they develop an investment which will have no environmental impact, or it will be, let's say, green friendly sort of initiative. So it's the new normal, let's say, over.
Earlier in your statement, you mentioned European Climate Pact and the climate law. And one of the elements of it would be also imposing carbon taxes on importers, let's put it that way. Can we also communicate it to the Armenian private sector that if they want to play a role in the European markets and export, they need to also consider their own carbon neutrality, prepare for those carbon taxes, and maybe this is something to work with the Ministry of Economy also to bring Armenian exporters to understand what is the impact of European Green Deal, European climate law to the private sector that exports to the European markets. Has there been a discussion of this? Yes, absolutely.
I understand that there is a lot of ongoing debate also within the European Union about this legislation, about this, let's say, also new pact that basically is out of the recognition that it cannot be only the European Commission or the governments taking action, that it has to be a pact with all stakeholders, as we said, with the ordinary citizens, with the local authorities, civil society, private sector. So that's the ongoing process about shaping, this new, let's say, legislation and pact for the EU on the climate and green agenda, and definitely this is going to have an impact also in our neighboring countries, as you say, and probably indeed, as soon as we have a bit more of clarity, also in our own EU about these, let's say, these new approaches and so on, definitely we will be soon also reaching out to our partner countries in the Balkans and in the Eastern Partnership about the implications, and indeed these trading emission systems, I guess, of course, will be also adjusted to the new reality. So, yeah, so this is, let's say, strategic thinking in process that will affect, let's say, our relations with all our partner countries.
And the mentality has to change, both on the national policy and regular daily activities level. I do want to ask if we have questions online. Please.
So far we have one question, which consists actually of two questions. As I understand, most of EU projects are designed and deployed in regions of Armenia where the poverty level is elevated in comparison to the national average. For your information, geographically included in Ararat region, but the closest to Yerevan, there are two villages that are the most densely populated ones of Armenia, Aintab and Nur Kharbert, that still stay in shadow with underestimated capacities. Question number 1, will you consider to include in your project these strategic villages? And question number 2, what must be done from the side of those communities to start collaboration with your organizations? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It's a very timely and relevant question, I would say, because also precisely these days we are discussing with many of you, with government, with civil society, with private sector, about the future of the EU cooperation in Armenia for the next 7 years, 2021 to 2027. So a lot of consultation has been and is taking place, so we will be happy also to invite to the person who made the question and the organizations he represents also to share their thinking, their ideas, their expectations about the future of the EU cooperation here in Armenia. Indeed, we do have a focus on the north. That was a sort of agreement with the government a few years back, and we are, in terms of the regions, having a specific emphasis on Gyumri, on Tavush, and also on Lori. It's a reality, but precisely these days also we are opening up the discussion about the geographical focus, and notably also now we are receiving requests also to pay more attention to other regions, notably now, of course, to the south, because of the well-known situation. So we are open. These negotiations are ongoing. And beyond that, a specific, let's say, geographical focus that we have on the three regions in the north, we also have, let's say, country open initiatives, like measures for economic growth, and some other projects that allow for specific initiatives to come from different regions and communities without a specific focus on the north. So I believe that there is a lot of space also to, why not, to partner with communities like the ones that have been mentioned before.
Thank you. I think there's a question from the audience.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. And I have two questions. Today we speak about wastewater treatment in Armenia, and this is very important because according to Water Code in Armenia, since 2012, 2025 for enterprises and 2030 for the communities. The wastewater have to be treated before discharging the water bodies, and now we have very few years to install wastewater treatment systems or mechanisms. So I know that EU member countries, particularly Germany, has a lot of experience in constructed wetlands and showing that effectiveness for the communities. They are cost effective and easy for operating by the communities. Some of the pilot projects are planned in frame of the EU 47 to install this kind of wetlands in Gerarkunik region, or maybe some trainings for the stakeholders to introduce these systems. And the second question is related to eco-education. I know that the EU give a high importance to eco-education, and there are some cooperation with Ministry of Education or some ongoing activities or maybe planned activities, particularly for school children and educational system programs. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. I'm gladly taking the first question. So this is exactly what we want, what we are supposed to do, and what we think is necessary. So the feasibility study we're carrying out in the EU4C1 project is exactly looking at the feasibility of a constructed wetland as a nature-based system. As I said, we just need to assess the climatic situation because the winter is very strong and long. And with decentralized systems are often biological treatment systems, so you need appropriate climatic conditions for the biology, so bacteria to live. And so this is part of the study we're doing. We hope, we're a bit critical whether it works, but we hope it works. If not, then we will look at alternative decentralized treatment options. And really the idea is just to highlight it can work and it will work, and then to look at developing a roadmap and upscaling this. Not only constructed wetlands, we are also opening the perspective. We don't just want to have one opportunity for a technical solution. There are many. As I said, there's a lot of experience around the world. Even in Armenia, I think Mr. Misropian can also tell us more about that. And it's just to find the right solution for the right environment. For example, if we look at constructed wetlands, there are certain conditions that have to be met. Yeah? You need the land space. So you can't really go in an established urban center. You will not find the space. A constructed wetland will be something for a village where the space is available. If you don't have that, then you need to look at other solutions. And as I already said, we're also looking beyond the lake. The wastewater sector doesn't just address the lake. So if we want to establish a system that works, we need to look at the sector as a overall. So we are working also with the water committee, for example. We're working with the private sector here, starting the dialogue as well. What can be provided there? And all the stakeholders really to kind of bring on, first of all, some dynamic, because we will not be able to find all the solution. The solution needs to be found by all the stakeholders in Armenia to develop all the, to discuss and develop all the relevant questions, including operation and maintenance. How is that done? Because now it's Veolia mainly has a contract. Some of these issues are not covered in the contract. For example, treatment is not covered actually. Collection is, but treatment not. So how do you deal with this in the future? So there are many questions, and we hope we can make a contribution to that. But not only EU4C1 can do that, it needs more than that. Thank you.
Should I answer the second part of the question?
Yes, I was
No,
going to ask
because,
you.
no, thanks a lot also, very, very good question about eco-education in general. Definitely, as we are having today a couple of examples, we have quite a number of, let's say, green projects, investments that focus both on the hard and on the soft, in terms of bringing investments, but also having impact, as we discussed before, in terms of policy, regulations, and so on. There is no exception of all the projects that we have on the green agenda in terms of also having important elements in terms of communication, visibility, and creating awareness raising, And under this chapter of communication, visibility, capacity building, awareness raising, we are definitely constantly messaging out to different groups. It can be to the children or to the youth in the schools. It can be through TV or radio, you know, to older segments, through internet. So we have quite, let's say, a comprehensive toolbox, you know, with all our partners. And also in the civil society. It's not only about development, bilateral development agencies and so on. So it's a requirement, it's a must that whatever we do in terms of investments and promoting positive green change, we do it in a sustainable way. And that cannot happen without having an impact in terms of mindsets and education, understanding about the importance of the community and people engagement to make sure that these systems are efficient and sustainable.
Yes.
Thank you very much to the organizers for this very important event. Thank you for the invitation. Well, I'm going to talk about the wastewater collection and treatment, sanitation in general. A couple of words about the specific issue. Well, there were two very interesting ideas, in fact, that we're also looking at this moment. First is that, unfortunately, the population of Armenia considers wastewater as waste, as garbage, and we have to essentially turn that idea into looking at wastewater as a resource. So thank you very much for mentioning that specifically. The other issue is that the whole process per se is quite expensive. It's a very expensive process, and definitely it's not possible for Armenia to ensure wastewater treatment, biological wastewater treatment that might be the proper standard for the whole area of the country. So I heard another very interesting idea in some of your speeches stating that we can treat the wastewater to the extent we can, and that apparently should be another slogan, another direction, because 100% treatment, we can build even the best wastewater treatment plant in the country that will be able to treat all the wastewaters, but it will not be of use for the environment. So yes, indeed, treat as much as we can must be priority number one for Armenia. And another very beautiful idea related, Christian, you said that for what the public demands. Well, I think, yes, our society should work in that direction. Our civil society organizations, environmental NGOs, should spread away the information about the most appropriate behavioral traits environmentally. So, by the way, in the end of June, when we commission the first biological treatment, and I would say even the hybrid, the natural and the biological treatment plant, in Parakar, next to Parakar community, we will commission it in June. So after half of June, I'm sure it will be commissioned, and you're all invited to the official opening. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, then I'll perhaps wrap this discussion of very interesting thoughts that I'd like to summarize in a couple of sentences. You know what I'll be going away with. I think overall the leitmotif of the discussion had four main directions in all sectors, be that agriculture, sustainable agriculture, wastewater, or overall, SEPA and harmonization with the EU. We do have a heavy legal agenda ahead of us that we need to work on a large number of legal regulatory solutions and standards, certified sustainable agriculture products, certified, standards for water quality before and after wastewater treatment. I do appreciate the comment on the cost, because we can put in, quote unquote, Lamborghini solutions here and there, but if they're not replicable across the country where we have many communities still lacking wastewater treatment stations, we do need to prioritize least cost and replicable solutions in this sector. We do, in all those sectors, including energy, we have a lot of legal work so that the demand is formulated in standards, the monitoring is there so that we have credible indicators of the condition of our environmental resources so we can take action and inform decisions. On the other hand, however, we do need to help the investments. We need to help the small investments in the limited fiscal space so that the private sector, the citizens, could take actions, and there would be some of these grassroots actions on a smaller scale that could hopefully create a pattern and have their transformational impact through some of the pilot projects that EU is supporting through its member states, bilateral programs and regional initiatives, and hopefully, create some of those replicable experiences that through education and awareness we can bring to other communities that lack those investments today. And last but not least, change the market environment so that, people take the lead, people are not afraid to borrow, expecting that, yes, this is challenging now, but this green recovery efforts hopefully divert the investments in the sectors where we can have that transformational impact, both on the economy and the environment, with biodiversity, water quality, land contamination. All those issues are quite challenging for Armenia today. And I would like to thank all of you for your dedicated work for Biodiversity. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody who watched us online and for questions online. And happy European Days. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.